Hello everyone. Welcome back to the channel. Today we continue the story of Brian Shaffer, and this will be the final part. Before we begin, if you enjoy this type of content, please like and subscribe. This is my first time creating a channel, so please support me. This really helps the channel grow and allows me to continue creating videos like this. Now, let's continue. I want to be fair to the investigators in this case, because missing person investigations are chaotic, complicated, and often built around incomplete information. But even so, there were mistakes. The first issue was time. Nearly 2 full days passed between Brian Shaffer's disappearance and the official missing person report. That delay was not the fault of the family. At the time, adults were often assumed to have left voluntarily unless there was immediate evidence of danger. But in cases like this, those first hours matter enormously. The second issue involved surveillance footage. Early attention focused heavily on the main entrance camera at Ugly Tuna Saloona. But fully reviewing every available camera across the Arena Grande complex, including service corridors and construction access areas, took time. And by then, it may already have been too late to preserve certain details clearly. Then there was the construction zone. The lower levels of the complex were under renovation at the time Brian disappeared. Investigators did inspect those areas, but construction crews were already back on site by Monday morning, which means if there had been footprints, disturbed debris, or any physical trace at all, it could already have been altered before investigators arrived. And then there's the final detail, the one many people find hardest to accept. Years after the disappearance, it became known that one of the surveillance cameras near a service area had a partial blind spot that night. A small section near one of the exits was not fully visible in the camera's field of view. Now, that does not prove Brian used that route, but it means there was at least one area investigators could never completely account for visually. Why that limitation was not fully understood immediately, nobody has ever clearly explained. Over the years, Brian Shaffer's disappearance has become one of the most discussed mysteries in online crime communities. Forums, podcasts, YouTube videos, and especially communities like Reddit. For years, people analyzed every available surveillance video, every witness statement, every inconsistency in the timeline, looking for that one detail the investigators might have missed. And over time, several main theories have emerged repeatedly. The first theory is the simplest: death by accident. Brian wanders off on an uncontrolled route. He's drunk, emotionally exhausted, perhaps disoriented, and somewhere near the Olentangy River, something's wrong. Supporters of this theory argue that the lack of evidence points more to tragedy than violence. The second theory is voluntary disappearance, the idea that Brian intentionally walked away from his own life. A new identity, a new place of residence, a complete reboot. Supporters of this theory often point to the emotional pressures in his life at the time: medical school, grief, exhaustion. But there's a serious problem with that explanation. Brian left it all behind. His bank accounts remained untouched. No confirmed use of his ID. No confirmed activity anywhere after that. Then there's a third theory: foul play, confrontation, a robbery gone wrong, a stranger encountered after leaving a bar, or perhaps something more deliberate. And finally, there's a theory that circulates online more often than almost any other: the darkest. The idea that what happened to Brian might not have been an isolated incident. Perhaps other disappearances in the area had similarities that people subsequently overlooked. Now, just to be clear, the official investigation found no evidence to support the idea of a linked scheme or a serial offender involved in this case. No confirmed connection was ever established. But on the internet, this theory never completely disappeared. Because uncertainty tends to keep darker possibilities alive. And then, years later, another opportunity arose. In 2015, almost 9 years after Brian Shaffer's disappearance, independent researchers and online investigators began independently reanalyzing the released surveillance footage, frame by frame, again and again. And according to some of these analyses, perhaps there was something that investigators had never publicly addressed. Closing time is approaching. A large crowd emerges from the bar. A partially obscured figure appears in the center of the group. A man, hard to see, partially obscured by other people passing through the doorway. And some internet researchers believe this figure may be Brian. The argument is simple. The heights appear similar. The build appears similar. Even some details of the clothing seem to match what Brian was wearing that evening. But there is one significant limitation. The video quality is extremely low. Too low for complete certainty. A definitive identification was never made. And this creates an exciting possibility. Because if that figure really was Brian, then the main mystery completely changes. He did leave the building. The camera captured it. And the impossible disappearance could simply have been the result of confusion within the crowded, grainy footage. But if it wasn't Brian, then the original question remains right where it began. How can someone enter a crowded bar and never come out? What makes this even stranger is that investigators have never publicly issued a detailed, official response to this particular interpretation of the video footage. And because of this, people are still arguing about this video many years later. For years, Randy Shaffer kept searching for his son. He gave interviews, worked with independent investigators, spoke to journalists, tried to keep the case alive long after public attention started fading. He even created a website dedicated to finding answers about Brian Shaffer's disappearance. And according to people close to the family, he never truly stopped looking. In one interview, Randy said something that stayed with a lot of people who followed the case. He said he didn't know whether his son was alive or dead. He didn't know whether what happened was an accident or a crime. The only thing he knew for certain was that his son was a good person and that he deserved answers. In 2012, 6 years after Brian disappeared, Randy Shaffer died. And he died without ever learning what happened to his son. That's the part of this story that's hardest to sit with. Because beyond the theories, the footage, the internet discussions, there was a real family trapped in uncertainty for years. This case isn't only about a man disappearing from a bar. It's also about a father who spent the final years of his life searching for his son and never got the answer he was looking for. At this point, all we can do is try to sort out the remaining details. And for me, here's what I'm coming to. Again, this is just a theory based on publicly available information. I believe Brian Shaffer most likely left the Ugly Tuna Saloona sometime between 1:55 and 2:30 a.m. Not through the highly visible main exit that investigators focused on early in the case, but through an area not fully covered by surveillance cameras. Service road, access point to the construction site, or he simply got lost in the chaos of the crowded exit after closing. I think he was alone and emotionally vulnerable, which those around him may not have fully understood. Alcohol, grief, his mother's birthday. What happened after he left? I don't know. And no one else knows either. Personally, I find it difficult to see any signs of a planned crime here. There is no confirmed suspect. A motive has not been established. There are no witnesses who clearly saw the violence occur. And almost 2 decades later, investigators still have not found any physical evidence directly implicating anyone else. This sounds more like the tragedy of a young man overcome with grief at the most inopportune moment in his life. But the truth is, I'm not sure. And it's precisely this uncertainty that's why people are still talking about it all these years later. Because there's a difference between a mystery and a wound that never heals. Brian Shaffer's disappearance was both. But no matter what theory you subscribe to, it always comes back to the same problem. If it was an accident, then where is Brian Shaffer? People have been searching for years. Rivers, lakes, fields, wastelands. Professional search teams, volunteers, investigators. And after all this time, nothing definitive has ever been found. That's what people have a hard time accepting, because a person doesn't simply vanish from existence. If Brian died, then somewhere there had to be evidence. Next, discovery. Answer. So people try to explain his very absence. Perhaps he was found somewhere but never properly identified. Perhaps his remains are in a location search teams never reached. Or perhaps the explanation wasn't random at all. And hanging over all this, one final question, one the investigators couldn't avoid. If Brian is alive, why hasn't he contacted anyone else? Not his friends, not his girlfriend, even when his father, Randy Shaffer, was dying. And if Brian is dead, where is he? One of those statements must be true, and now, many years later, no one has been able to answer any of them. The disappearance of Brian Shaffer isn't really a story about monsters, or secret organizations, or some hidden mastermind waiting in the shadows. What makes this case disturbing is how ordinary everything looked. An ordinary night, an ordinary bar, friends drinking after midnight in Columbus. And then one person walks out of the known story and never comes back. At its core, this case is really about uncertainty, about the limits of systems people trust to explain reality. Surveillance cameras, investigations, technology. The assumption that if something happens in a crowded public place, someone will always see it. But sometimes, even surrounded by people, someone can disappear completely. And underneath all the theories, all the footage analysis, all the online debates, there was still a father waiting for his son to come home. Randy Shaffer searched for answers for the rest of his life, and in the end, he died without ever finding them. At 1:55 a.m., 0.8 second pause. The camera captures Brian Shaffer for the last time. 1.0 second pause. For a moment, he looks directly into the lens. 1.1 second pause. Then he turns. 0.8 second pause. And returns to the restaurant. The camera continues recording. 1.2 second pause. People continue to leave the building. 0.8 second pause. The night continues. 1.0 second pause. But Brian is no longer in the frame. And perhaps a part of him never truly left this place. What do you think happened to Brian Shaffer? Do you believe he left unnoticed? Do you think it was an accident? Or do you think there's something investigators missed completely? Leave your theory in the comments and explain why you believe it. And if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing, leaving a like, and turning on notifications so you don't miss future videos. I'm still new to YouTube, so your support genuinely helps this channel grow.